Welcome, brave listener, to a journey unlike any you've taken before. This is not a bedtime story. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about our ancient ancestors from millions of years ago, when we were more ape than human, when survival meant brutality, when every day was a desperate struggle against predators, starvation, disease, and each other. What you're about to hear is not fiction. Every fact is based on fossil evidence, skeletal analysis, archaeological discoveries, and comparative studies with our closest living relatives. The marks on ancient bones tell stories of violence. The teeth marks reveal cannibalism. The injuries show us how our ancestors died, often in agony, often at the hands of their own kind. This is the story of Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and the other ancient human species that lived between 4 million and 100,000 years ago. These were creatures caught between animal and human, possessing just enough intelligence to understand their suffering, but not enough technology to escape it. Prepare yourself. The truth of our origins is far darker than you might imagine. Fact 1. Infanticide by dominant males. Our first horrifying truth. Dominant males systematically murdered the infants of other males to make females sexually receptive. When a new alpha male took control of an early hominin group, his first act was infanticide. He would hunt down every baby sired by the previous leader and kill them, often by crushing their skulls with his jaws or smashing them against rocks. The mothers fought desperately to protect their babies, but they were smaller and weaker. Within seconds, their infants were dead. This wasn't occasional violence. This was systematic, routine behavior shaped by millions of years of evolution. Fossilized infant skulls with trauma patterns confirm this happened regularly. Every generation, countless babies died this way, and mothers were forced to mate with the males who murdered their children. Fact 2. The Tong child killed by an eagle. The Tong child, one of the most famous Australopithecus africanus fossils, tells a terrifying story. This 3-year-old child, who lived 2.8 million years ago, has distinctive puncture marks in its eye sockets, marks that match perfectly with the talons of prehistoric eagles. Scientists have confirmed that this child was grabbed by a massive eagle, likely while playing on the ground, and carried into the sky while still alive and screaming. The eagle took the child to its nest high in the rocks and began to eat it alive, starting with the soft tissues of the face and eyes. The Tong child was not unusual. Early hominins were regular prey for enormous birds of prey. Parents lived in constant terror, knowing that looking away for just a moment could mean watching their child snatched into the sky. Fact 3. Leopards stored hominin bodies as food. Fossilized Paranthropus robust skulls found in South African caves show distinctive puncture marks, the canine teeth of leopards piercing directly through the skull. These weren't quick deaths. Leopards would ambush hominins near water sources, sinking their teeth into the back of the skull and dragging the victim, still alive, up into trees. There, the leopard would cache the body in the branches, returning over days to feed. Multiple hominin skeletons show evidence of this. Our ancestors weren't hunters, they were prey, hunted and stored like groceries. 60% of Australopithecus fossils show signs of death by predation, usually before age 15. Fact 4. Scavenging rotting meat, full of maggots. The earliest hominins weren't mighty hunters. They were desperate scavengers eating rotting flesh. Unable to kill large animals themselves, they waited for real predators to make kills, then crept in to steal scraps after even hyenas and vultures had finished. They ate meat crawling with maggots, filled with bacteria, in advanced stages of decomposition. They would break open bones already stripped clean, sucking out the marrow, often the only nutrition left. This caused constant intestinal parasites, diseases, and food poisoning. Their teeth show wear patterns from gnawing on bones. Many died from infections caused by consuming rotten meat. Fact 5. Homo habilis cannibalism in Grandolina. At Grandolina, Spain, archaeologists found 800,000 Year-old Homo habilis remains with unmistakable evidence of cannibalism. The bones show cut marks from stone tools, systematic dismemberment, and processing identical to how they butchered animals. The skulls were smashed open to extract brains. Long bones were cracked for marrow. Every usable bit of flesh was carved off. This wasn't survival cannibalism during famine. The site shows repeated systematic processing of human bodies alongside animal remains. They were eating each other regularly, treating human flesh as just another food source. Evidence from multiple sites confirms this was widespread behavior among early human species. Fact 6. Constant forced mating without consent. Female early hominins had no concept of choosing mates or refusing sex. When a female entered estrus, she was mounted by multiple males throughout the day, every day, whether she wanted it or not. Studies of chimpanzees show females are mated by 20 to 30 different males during peak fertility, often violently. Fossilized pelvic bones of early hominins show fractures and injuries consistent with forced, violent mating. Dominant males controlled sexual access through intimidation and violence. Subordinate males who attempted to mate were brutally attacked. Females who resisted were beaten until they submitted. This was the only reproductive system our ancestors knew for millions of years. Fact 7. Males bit off competitors' testicles. Chimpanzees, when fighting for dominance, specifically target the genitals of rivals. They grab and bite with enough force to castrate opponents completely. Early hominin skeletons show similar injuries, pelvic damage consistent with violent genital trauma. Males who challenged for dominance or mating access risked having their testicles ripped off by more powerful rivals. This wasn't metaphorical. This was literal castration through biting. The victim would survive the attack, but could never reproduce, effectively erased from the evolutionary competition. The psychological terror of this threat kept subordinate males in line for generations. Fact 8. Deformed babies, abandoned immediately. Any infant born with visible deformities, disabilities, or weakness was abandoned immediately after birth. The mother or other group members would simply leave the newborn on the ground and walk away. Within hours, the crying infant would attract predators. Hyenas, leopards, or wild dogs would find the helpless baby and devour it alive. There was no compassion, no medical intervention, no attempt to help. A deformed child was a drain on precious resources. Better to let it die quickly and try again. Infant mortality exceeded 70% in many early hominin populations. Fact 9. Territorial fights ended in dismemberment. When different hominin groups encountered each other at territorial boundaries, violence was immediate and extreme. Chimpanzee studies show they attack by biting off fingers, tearing off faces, and ripping off limbs. Early hominin skeletons show missing fingers, hands with bite marks, and evidence of violent dismemberment. These fights were not about temporary dominance, they were about killing or permanently maiming rivals. Fingers were bitten off one by one. Ears were torn away. Lips were ripped from faces. The screaming victims were left bleeding and disfigured, a warning to others about defending territory. Fact 10. Brain-eating rituals in Atapuerca. At Atapuerca, Spain, 800,000-year-old skulls show systematic perforation at the base myas. The foramen magnum was enlarged deliberately to extract brains. This wasn't just cannibalism for nutrition. The careful, ritualistic way brains were removed suggests ceremonial consumption. They believed eating the brains of enemies would transfer their strength, knowledge, or power. Multiple skulls processed this way indicate repeated practice. They killed rivals, opened their skulls like coconuts, and consumed the soft brain tissue while fresh. This ritual cannibalism was a fundamental part of their culture. Fact 11. We were prey, not predators. For millions of years, early hominins were not apex predators, they were prey animals. They spent every night huddled in trees, terrified of what hunted them in the darkness. The sounds of predators below, the coughing of leopards, the laughter of hyenas, the roar of lions, meant another night of terror, hoping they wouldn't be dragged from the branches. Their entire existence revolved around avoiding being eaten. They couldn't relax, couldn't feel safe. Every water source was a potential ambush site. Every open space was a killing ground. Most died violently in the jaws of predators before reaching adulthood. Fact 12. Smilodon actively hunted hominins. Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, had 9-inch canine teeth designed to puncture throats and sever spinal cords. Multiple hominin fossils show puncture wounds matching Smilodon dentition. These massive cats, weighing up to 600 pounds, specifically targeted early humans as prey. They were ambush predators waiting near water or trails, then exploding from cover to sink those massive fangs into hominin necks. Death wasn't instant. The bite paralyzed but didn't immediately kill. Victims remained conscious while the cat began feeding on them, unable to move or scream, feeling every bite. Fact 13. Giant hyenas dragged hominins to dens alive. Pachyrhinocuta, the giant prehistoric hyena, stood 4 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed 400 pounds. Their jaws could crush bone like twigs. They hunted hominins actively, grabbing them by the leg or torso and dragging them back to communal dens. Multiple hominin skeletons found in hyena dens show the victims were alive when brought there. The hyenas would gather in groups and feed on the still-living victim over hours or days. Hyena dens contain hundreds of hominin bones, evidence of generations of predation. Fact 14. The man-eating crocodile species. Tricotylus anthropophagus, literally man-eating crocodile, was an 8-meter prehistoric crocodile that lived in East African lakes where hominins gathered water. Its name isn't metaphorical. Fossil evidence shows it specialized in hunting hominins at water sources. It would lie submerged, perfectly still, waiting for a hominin to bend down to drink. The attack was explosive. Massive jaws clamped around the torso, pulling the victim underwater. The death roll began, spinning violently, disorienting and drowning the prey simultaneously. Every trip to get water was a gamble with death. Fact 15. Giant eagles carried off children. African crowned eagles, much larger in prehistoric times, regularly snatched hominin children. Their talons could exert 500 pounds of pressure per square inch. They would swoop down silently, grab a child under 3 years old, and carry them away while parents watched helplessly. The child's screams would fade as the eagle flew to its nest. There, the eagle would begin feeding on the child while it was still alive and conscious, starting with the soft tissues of the face and abdomen. Multiple child skulls found in ancient eagle nests show this happened routinely. Fact 16. Leopards used hominins as living food caches. Leopards perfected the art of storing hominins in trees. They would kill by biting through the back of the skull, but not always fatally. Sometimes the victim survived the initial attack, paralyzed but conscious, dragged up into a tree and wedged in branches. The leopard would return periodically to feed, eating the victim alive over several days. The paralyzed hominin could feel everything, see everything, but couldn't move or scream effectively. They would watch the leopard approach each time, knowing what was coming, unable to escape. Fact 17. 60% died by predation before 15. Statistical analysis of Australopithecus remains shows that 60% died violently by predation before reaching 15 years old. Think about that. In every group of 10 children, 6 would be killed and eaten by predators. Parents expected to lose most of their children to horrible deaths. There was no safety, no protection sufficient to prevent this slaughter. Childhood was a continuous nightmare of near misses and watching siblings, friends, and playmates torn apart by predators. Fact 18. Cave lions hunted in coordinated packs. European cave lions were 25% larger than modern lions and hunted in larger prides. They specifically targeted Homo erectus groups moving through Europe. Using coordinated ambush tactics, they would surround hominin groups and attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The hominins had nowhere to run. Stone tools were useless against multiple 500-pound lions attacking at once. Entire families were wiped out in minutes, their bones left scattered at kill sites that archaeologists have discovered. Fact 19. Giant snakes swallowed hominins whole. Gigantophis, an 11-meter prehistoric snake, lived in African forests where early hominins foraged. These snakes could swallow a full-grown Australopithecus whole. The attack was silent. A sudden strike, coils wrapping around the torso, constricting with bone-crushing force. As the victim suffocated, unable to breathe, the snake's jaws would begin to dislocate, opening impossibly wide. The swallowing process took hours. The victim, sometimes still barely alive, would be slowly consumed head first, feeling their body slide into the snake's throat. Fact 20. Cave bears crushed entire families. Cave bears weighed up to 1,000 kilograms, ate over a ton of muscle and bone. They were not the gentle herbivores. Later bears became. They were omnivorous and highly territorial. When hominin groups took shelter in caves, they often found they had invaded a cave bear's den. The enraged bear would attack with devastating force. A single swipe of its paw could shatter a skull. It would maul every member of the family, adults and children alike, defending its territory. Multiple cave sites show hominin remains mixed with cave bear remains, evidence of these fatal encounters. Fact 21. Homo erectus killed and ate Homo habilis. At Koibi Fora, Kenya, we find definitive evidence that Homo erectus systematically hunted and consumed Homo habilis. The two species overlapped in time and space, and the larger, more advanced Homo erectus saw the smaller Homo habilis as prey. Fossil sites show Homo habilis bones with cut marks from Homo erectus tools, processed exactly like animal prey. This wasn't competition, this was predation. One human species eating another, driving them toward extinction through direct consumption. Fact 22. Facial mutilation established dominance. Dominant males in early hominin groups maintained control through facial mutilation. They would bite the faces of subordinates, tearing off lips, noses, ears, and cheeks. Multiple skulls show healed facial injuries consistent with bite wounds. The disfigured subordinates served as visible warnings to others. Imagine living your entire life with your face torn off, a constant reminder and advertisement of your low status and the consequences of challenging authority. Fact 23. Fingers torn off in dominance fights. Many hominin skeletons show missing finger bones, not from predation, but from intraspecies violence. During fights over mating access or dominance, combatants would grab each other's hands and bite off fingers one by one. The pain was excruciating, but the permanent loss sent a message. Every handless or fingerless individual in a group was a testament to the brutality of their social hierarchy. Fact 24. Chimpanzee-style raids and murders. Modern chimpanzees engage in coordinated raids on neighboring groups, specifically to kill. They patrol borders, and when they find isolated individuals from rival groups, they attack in groups of 5 to 10. They beat, bite, and dismember the victim over 10 to 20 minutes, then leave the body as a warning. Early hominins engaged in identical behavior. Sites show concentrated remains of individuals from different groups killed violently and left unburied, victims of prehistoric murder raids. Fact 25. Systematic infanticide. After leadership changes. Every time dominant leadership changed in a group or set, perhaps every 3 to 5 years, waves of infanticide followed. All infants under 2 years old sired by the previous leader were killed. This meant that every few years mothers watched their babies murdered. Some females experienced this multiple times in their lives. The psychological trauma was immense, but there was no escape. This was the only social system that existed. Fact 26. Females beaten until they released babies. When new males wanted to kill infants, mothers would flee with their babies. The males would chase them down and beat them viciously, punching, kicking, biting, until the mother's grip weakened and she dropped her infant. Fossilized female skeletons show patterns of healed rib fractures and limb injuries, consistent with repeated beatings. Mothers knew what was coming but fought anyway, suffering brutal violence in futile attempts to save their doomed babies. Fact 27. Old males expelled to die alone. Once a male lost dominance, usually around age 20 to 25, he was expelled from the group. The new leadership drove him away through violence. He would wander alone, without the protection of the group, without access to females or resources. Most died within weeks, killed by predators, unable to hunt or defend themselves alone. Some skeletons of solitary old males have been found with extensive predator damage, showing they died slowly and painfully, alone. Fact 28. Eating their own dead during famine. During severe droughts or famines, early hominin groups consumed their own dead. Rather than burying group members who died, they processed the bodies for food. Bones at Atapuerca show that during crisis periods, recently deceased group members were butchered and eaten alongside animal remains. Families ate their own grandparents, their own children who died of disease, anyone who passed away. Survival overrode every social bond. Fact 29. Siblings killed siblings for resources. Competition for resources was so intense that siblings would kill each other. Studies of modern chimpanzees show that when food is scarce, older siblings will sometimes kill younger ones. The fossil record shows hominin children with trauma consistent with violence from similarly sized individuals. Not adults, not predators, but other children. Brothers and sisters, competing desperately for parental investment and food, murdered each other. Fact 30. Deformed infants abandoned at birth. Any sign of deformity, weakness or abnormality at birth meant immediate abandonment. The infant would be placed on the ground, and the mother would walk away, often coerced by other group members. The baby's cries would attract predators within an hour or two. Parents had no choice. A disabled child would consume resources desperately needed for healthy children who might survive. Fact 31. 20 to 30 matings per day during estrus. When a female entered estrus, her swollen perineum signaled her fertility to all males in the group. For the next several days, she would be mounted by every male repeatedly, sometimes 20 to 30 times per day. She had no ability to refuse, no concept of choice. Male after male would take her, violently if she resisted. This continued until her fertile period ended, leaving her exhausted, injured, and often pregnant with no certain knowledge of paternity. Fact 32. No concept of consent existed. The idea of sexual consent literally did not exist. Females were sexually receptive a few days per month. During that time, they were communal sexual property. Males took what they wanted when they wanted. Females who resisted were beaten until they stopped resisting. Fossilized pelvic bones show fractures and damage consistent with violent sexual trauma. This was the only reproductive system for millions of years. Fact 33. Dominant males monopolized reproduction through violence. Alpha males maintained sexual monopolies through constant violence against subordinates. Any male who attempted to mate without permission was immediately attacked, bitten, beaten, sometimes maimed. The dominant male couldn't watch everyone all the time, but the threat of brutal retaliation was enough. Most males in a group never reproduced at all, living their entire lives under threat of violence if they even attempted to mate. Fact 34. Young females forcibly mated at first cycle. As soon as a female had her first menstrual cycle, typically around age 10 to 12, she became sexually available to adult males. There was no concept of adolescence, no protection for young females, They were forcibly mated immediately, often resulting in pregnancy during early adolescence. These early pregnancies frequently resulted in death during childbirth due to incompletely developed pelvic structures. Fact 35. Males killed female infants to ensure future competition. Some dominant males specifically killed female infants while allowing male infants to survive. The twisted logic, more surviving males meant more future competition, which increased the value of dominant positions. By creating a male-biased sex ratio, they intensified future competition, making their own dominance more valuable. This infanticide pattern appears in multiple species and likely occurred in early hominins as well. Fact 36. Postmenopausal females expelled. Once a female could no longer reproduce, typically around age 35 to 40, she lost all social value in many groups. Without the ability to produce offspring, she was seen as consuming resources without contributing. Groups would drive out postmenopausal females, who would die alone, unable to survive without group protection. The few elderly females who survived did so by providing childcare services, earning their place by caring for others' offspring. Fact 37. Neighboring groups kidnapped females. When groups encountered each other, males would attempt to kidnap females from rival groups. This involved killing any males who resisted, grabbing females and forcibly dragging them away. The kidnapped females were then repeatedly raped by their captors until they were absorbed into the new group. Evidence of this comes from genetic studies, showing patterns of female migration between groups and skeletal trauma consistent with violent capture. Fact 38. Males bit females who resisted mating. Female skeletons show bite marks on arms, shoulders, and backs, wounds that healed, indicating the victims survived. These are defensive wounds from attempting to resist mating. Males would bite deeply enough to cause pain and scarring, punishment for resistance and deterrent for future refusal. Some females show multiple healed bite wounds, evidence of repeated violent encounters. Fact 39. Mating caused pelvic fractures. Fossilized female pelvic bones show fractures in patterns consistent with forced mating trauma. The violence of forced sexual encounters combined with size differences between males and females resulted in broken pelvic bones, torn tissues, and permanent injuries. These injuries often led to complications during childbirth or infections that killed the female later. Fact 40. Pregnant females forced to mate. Pregnancy provided no protection from forced mating. Males would continue to mount pregnant females, often causing miscarriages. The trauma of forced mating, combined with the stress on the developing fetus, resulted in spontaneous abortions in many cases. This seeming waste makes evolutionary sense. If the pregnancy was sired by a previous male, forcing a miscarriage meant the female would return to estrus faster. Fact 41. Guinea worms grew inside bodies. Dracunculiasis, caused by guinea worms, infected early hominins who drank contaminated water. The larvae would grow inside the body for a year, maturing into worms up to 1 meter long. When ready to release larvae, the worm would create a painful blister, usually on the leg or foot. When the victim sought relief by immersing the burning wound in water, the worm would emerge, protruding from the wound. The only treatment was slowly winding the worm around a stick over days or weeks, pulling it out millimeter by millimeter. Breaking the worm caused severe infections. Living with a meter-long worm wriggling inside your leg was agonizing. Fact 42. Sleeping sickness turned hominins into violent zombies. Tsetse flies carried trypanosomes that caused African sleeping sickness. In early stages, victims suffered fever and pain, but as parasites crossed the blood-brain barrier, they caused neurological symptoms, confusion, personality changes, and violent aggression followed by lethargy and coma. Infected hominins would attack their own group members in delirium before eventually falling into the sleep from which they never woke. Groups had to restrain or kill infected members to protect themselves. Fact 43. Malaria killed 40% of children. Plasmodium parasites, transmitted by mosquitoes, caused malaria that killed an estimated 40% of hominin children before age 5. The fever would spike to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, causing seizures and brain damage. Children would die in convulsions or survive with permanent cognitive impairment. Parents expected to lose nearly half their children to malaria. It was the most common cause of infant and child death in many regions. Fact 44. Intestinal parasites caused extreme malnutrition. Tapeworms, roundworms, and other intestinal parasites infected virtually all early hominins. These parasites, some growing to 10 meters long, consumed nutrients meant for the host. Fossilized coprolites, preserved feces, show massive parasite loads. Children with severe infestations showed stunted growth and skeletal evidence of malnutrition despite eating. The parasites would sometimes block intestines completely, causing agonizing death from obstruction and perforation. Fact 45. Wounds turned gangrenous in days. Any break in the skin was potentially fatal. Without antibiotics, even small cuts became infected. Bacteria would multiply rapidly, especially in tropical climates. Within days, the wound would become gangrenous. Tissue would die, turn black, and begin to rot while still attached to the living body. The infection would spread up the limb. The victim would develop sepsis, and death would follow in agony. The smell of their own body rotting was the last thing many early hominins experienced. Fact 46. Tuberculosis deformed bones, while victims slowly died. Tuberculosis infected early hominins, as evidenced by characteristic lesions on ancient bones. TB typically attacked the lungs, but in severe cases spread to bones, particularly the spine. Victims would develop Pott's disease, tubercular infection of vertebrae, causing spinal deformity, paralysis, and chronic pain. They would slowly suffocate over years as lesions destroyed lung tissue, all while watching their spine collapse and curve grotesquely. Many TB victims show years of progressive deformity before death. Fact 47. Dental abscesses spread to brain. Without dentistry, tooth infections were common and fatal. Abscesses would form at the root of infected teeth. The infection would track through the maxillary bone toward the brain. Multiple skulls show pathways where infections eroded bone, spreading toward the cranial cavity. Once infection reached the brain, death was certain. Victims suffered weeks of increasing headache, confusion, and agony before dying. Fact 48. Fractures never healed properly. Broken bones without medical treatment rarely healed correctly. Fossilized skeletons show numerous malunited fractures, bones that healed at wrong angles, with overlapping fragments, or with permanent deformities. These injuries caused lifelong pain and disability. A broken leg that healed badly meant limping for life, unable to run from predators or keep up during migrations. Many such individuals show evidence of subsequent predation. Fact 49. Hemorrhagic fevers caused bleeding from all orifices. Various viral hemorrhagic fevers infected early African hominins. Diseases similar to Ebola caused victims to bleed from eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and rectum. They would vomit blood, suffer internal bleeding, and die in pools of their own blood within days. Groups had to abandon infected members, watching from a distance as they died alone in agony, too dangerous to approach. Fact 50. Leprosy rotted flesh while victims lived. Mycobacterium leprae caused leprosy. Even in prehistoric times, the bacteria would infect nerves, causing loss of sensation without feeling. Victims would injure themselves repeatedly without noticing. Fingers and toes would become infected, gangrenous, and eventually fall off. The face would deform as nasal cartilage was destroyed. Victims would live for years or decades, slowly losing body parts, becoming increasingly disfigured until infection or another disease killed them. Fact 51. Eating dirt, bark, and feces. during drought. During severe droughts that lasted decades, early hominins resorted to eating anything. Archaeological evidence shows coprolites containing dirt, bark, seeds from inedible plants, and even partially digested feces from herbivores reconsumed in desperation. The desperation was absolute. Eating dirt caused intestinal blockages. Eating bark provided no nutrition and damaged teeth, but starvation was worse. Fact 52. Weak members killed and eaten first. When famine struck, groups made terrible calculations. The weakest members, elderly, who couldn't contribute, disabled individuals, sick children, would be deliberately killed and eaten to preserve resources for those more likely to survive. These weren't emotional decisions. They were cold survival math. Multiple sites show processed human remains with patterns suggesting selective consumption of vulnerable individuals during resource crises. Fact 53. Mothers ate dead babies when no food existed. Perhaps the most horrifying evidence, infant remains showing processing marks found at sites with evidence of extreme food scarcity. When a baby died of disease or starvation, and when no other food was available, mothers and families would consume the body rather than waste the protein. The alternative was everyone starving, but the psychological horror of eating your own child is beyond imagining. Fact 54. Digging up rotting corpses to eat. During famines, early hominins would excavate recently buried group members to consume the decomposing flesh. Sites show disarticulated remains that were buried and later dug up, with butchering marks added post-burial. They were eating corpses that had been underground for days or weeks, flesh rotting and maggot-infested. Desperation overrode the disease risk and horror of consuming putrid human meat. Fact 55. Competing with hyenas for rotten carcasses. Early hominins were so desperate that they would challenge hyenas and vultures for partially consumed, rotting animal carcasses. They would drive off scavengers and grab whatever remained bones with scraps of decomposing meat, skin, any edible tissue. The meat would be crawling with maggots, contaminated with bacteria, days or weeks old. But they ate it anyway, often dying from food poisoning or parasites contracted from these desperate meals. Fact 56. Breaking bones for marrow after other scavengers finished. After every other scavenger had taken their fill of a carcass, early hominins would arrive with stones to break open the bones. They would smash femurs and other large bones, extracting the marrow inside, often the only nutrition remaining after other predators and scavengers were done. Tool marks on ancient bones show they were breaking already cleaned bones, scraping out every last bit of marrow they could reach. Fact 57. Abandoning weak during migrations *******. When groups migrated to escape drought or follow resources, anyone who couldn't keep pace was left behind. Children who fell sick, elderly who tired, injured individuals who slowed the group, they would be abandoned to die alone. The group couldn't wait. Staying together in exhausted resources meant everyone dying, so they left the weak behind, listening to their cries fade into the distance. Fact 58. Broken teeth from eating bones caused fatal infections. The desperation to extract every calorie led to eating increasingly hard material, bones, nuts with stone-hard shells, anything with potential nutrition. This fractured teeth, broken teeth exposed pulp to bacteria, causing abscesses that tracked to the brain and killed. Multiple skulls show severe dental trauma from attempting to eat inappropriate materials during food scarcity. Fact 59. Dehydration, death in 3 days. When water sources dried up during drought, death came quickly. Human bodies cannot survive more than 3 days without water. Early hominins would watch their children die of thirst, unable to produce tears because they were too dehydrated. The desperation in those final days, drinking urine, sucking on rocks, eating water-rich plants that were toxic, was absolute. Fact 60. drinking blood for survival. Some groups survived droughts by drinking blood from prey animals. They would wound an animal just enough to collect blood without killing it, drinking the blood fresh. This provided fluids and some nutrition during periods without water or food. The practice appears in some modern pastoralist societies and likely occurred in prehistoric times during extreme resource scarcity. Fact 61: 70% of females died in childbirth. Australopithecus and early Homo females faced a terrible biological paradox. Walking upright required narrow pelvises. Larger brains required bigger infant heads. The result was extremely dangerous childbirth. Studies suggest up to 70% of females died during or shortly after childbirth. Every pregnancy was potentially fatal. Most women who reached reproductive age died giving birth within a few years. Fact 62: narrow pelvis caused 4-day labor deaths. The obstetric dilemma of bipedalism meant that infant heads barely fit through the birth canal. Labor could last 3, 4, even 5 days of continuous agony. Many women died from exhaustion before the baby was even born. Others died when the baby became stuck, unable to be born, unable to retreat, slowly suffocating, while the mother bled internally. Fact 63: babies' large heads got stuck, killing both. Cephalopelvic disproportion piece, when the baby's head is too large for the mother's pelvis, was common and always fatal without surgical intervention. The baby would descend partway, then lodge immovably in the birth canal. Over hours or days, both would die, the baby from compression and oxygen deprivation, the mother from tissue damage, bleeding, and infection. Fact 64: no help during labor. Women birthed alone or died. Unlike many mammals, human birth is difficult enough that assistance is usually necessary, but early hominin females often gave birth alone, without help. If complications arose, there was no one to assist. Archaeological evidence suggests many females died in isolated locations, their skeletons found with infant remains still positioned in the birth canal. Dying alone in childbirth, both you and your baby perishing together, was tragically common. Fact 65: premature babies were consumed. Any infant born significantly premature had zero chance of survival without modern medicine. These tiny, non-viable infants weren't buried or mourned. They were consumed, providing needed protein to the mother recovering from childbirth. This wasn't cruelty, it was pragmatic resource use. The infant was dead or dying. Wasting the nutritional value made no sense. Fact 66: 60% of infants died in first year. Of infants born alive, approximately 60% died before their first birthday. Disease, predation, accident, malnutrition. The threats were countless. Parents expected to lose most of their babies. Having a child survive to age 5 was exceptional. Emotional attachment to infants was necessarily limited, because losing them was the norm, not the exception. Fact 67: yearly pregnancies, most fatal. Without contraception or understanding of reproduction, females became pregnant whenever they were fertile and not currently nursing. This meant nearly yearly pregnancies from puberty until death. Most of these pregnancies ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, or death of mother and child during birth. A female might conceive 15 times in her life and see only 1 or 2 children survive to adulthood. Fact 68: post-birth infections, killed in 48 hours. Puerperal sepsis, infection of the uterus after childbirth, killed countless mothers. Without antibiotics, bacteria entering during birth would multiply rapidly. Within 24 to 48 hours, the mother would develop fever, septic shock, and die. The family would watch helplessly as a woman who survived childbirth died days later from infection, leaving a newborn without a mother. Fact 69: babies born during migration were abandoned. If a female went into labor during group migration, The group faced a terrible choice. They couldn't wait days for labor to complete mites, they'd all starve. So if labor began during critical migration periods, the woman would be left behind, alone, to give birth or die in the attempt. Most died. Those who survived birth had to catch up to the group while carrying a newborn, with no food and predators everywhere. Fact 70. Disabled infants left for predators. Any infant born with visible disabilities, clubfoot, cleft palate, missing limbs, obvious neurological problems, was placed on the ground and abandoned. The crying attracted predators within hours. Hyenas, leopards, or eagles would kill and consume the defenseless infant. Parents might watch from a distance, but they wouldn't intervene. A disabled child couldn't survive anyway, and would drain resources from healthy children. Fact 71. Tree falls during predator escapes. When predators attacked, early hominins fled into trees. In the panic, many fell, sometimes from heights of 10 to 15 meters. The falls caused spinal injuries, fractured skulls, broken limbs. Multiple skeletons show injuries consistent with falls from height, many of which would have caused paralysis. A paralyzed hominin couldn't escape predators, couldn't feed themselves, and died slowly from thirst or predation. Fact 72. Drowning while fleeing predators. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Excavations near ancient water sources show concentrations of hominin remains with evidence of drowning. When chased by predators, groups would flee toward water, hoping to escape. Many, especially children and elderly, would drown in the panic, unable to swim well, exhausted from running, dragged under by currents. Predators would sometimes follow them into the water, killing them as they tried to swim. Fact 73. Trampled by stampeding animals. Living among vast herds of large animals meant constant danger of stampedes. Buffalo, wildebeest, elephants. When these animals panicked and ran, anything in their path was crushed. Multiple sites show hominin remains with crushing injuries consistent with trampling. Entire families could be wiped out in seconds, crushed into the mud beneath thousands of hooves. Fact 74. Burned alive in forest fires. Natural wildfires, started by lightning, would sweep across grasslands and forests. Early hominins, slow-moving and poorly equipped to outrun fire, would sometimes be trapped. Archaeological sites show charred remains of multiple individuals, including children, who died together as fire overtook them. The final minutes, surrounded by smoke and flame, unable to breathe or escape, would be absolute terror. Fact 75. Rock avalanches buried cave dwellers. Many groups sheltered in caves or rock overhangs. Earthquakes or erosion would sometimes cause these shelters to collapse. Sites show crushed skeletons of entire family groups, buried alive when tons of rock fell on their shelter while they slept. Some survived the initial collapse but were trapped, dying slowly of thirst and suffocation in the darkness beneath the rubble. Fact 76. Snake bites caused suffocation death. Venomous snake bites were common when gathering plants or fetching water. Neurotoxic venom from cobras or mambas would cause progressive paralysis. Victims remained conscious but unable to move or breathe. Over hours, they would suffocate as their diaphragm paralyzed, dying while fully aware. Groups would watch helplessly as the bitten individual slowly stopped breathing, unable to help. Fact 77. Lightning strikes on tree sheltering groups. During thunderstorms, groups would shelter under large trees. This made them targets for lightning strikes. When lightning hit, it would kill or severely burn multiple individuals simultaneously. Archaeological sites show groups of remains with burn patterns consistent with lightning strikes. The survivors would be left with severe burns, often dying from infections in the following days. Fact 78. Flash floods drowned sleeping families. Groups sheltering in low caves or valleys would sometimes be caught by flash floods. Sudden heavy rain upstream would send walls of water through sleeping camps in the middle of the night. Entire families would be swept away and drowned before they could react. Remains found in ancient flood deposits show they died in their sleep, never knowing what happened. Fact 79, falling into deep crevasses. Moving through rocky terrain, especially at night or in fog, individuals would sometimes fall into deep crevasses or sinkholes. They would survive the fall but be trapped at the bottom, unable to climb out. Some excavations show skeletal remains at the bottom of vertical shafts where individuals died slowly from injuries, thirst, or starvation. Their cries for help would eventually stop, and they would be forgotten. Fact 80. Giant scorpion stings caused fatal convulsions. Prehistoric scorpions were much larger than most modern species. Their venom was correspondingly more potent. Stings caused extreme pain, convulsions, and often death, especially in children. The victim would go into seizures, unable to breathe, body rigid with muscle contractions. Death could take hours of continuous convulsions before respiratory failure finally ended the suffering. Fact 81. Volcanic eruptions suffocated entire populations. Volcanic eruptions weren't just local disasters, they were extinction events. The eruption of Mount Toba, 74,000 years ago, released ash and gases that caused a volcanic winter lasting years. Temperatures dropped globally. Most plants died. Early human populations crashed from perhaps millions to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. Groups far from the volcano died of cold and starvation as the sun was blocked by ash. They didn't understand what was happening, just that the world had gone dark and cold, and they were slowly freezing and starving. Fact 82. Glaciations killed 90% of European hominins. When ice ages locked Europe in glaciers, 90% of resident hominin populations died. The cold was absolute temperatures dropping 50 degrees or more. Food disappeared. Water froze. Groups fled south, but many didn't make it. Frozen remains from glacial periods show they died of hypothermia, huddled together for warmth that never came, slowly freezing to death. Fact 83. Century-long droughts caused mass extinction. Climate records show droughts in Africa lasting not years but decades or even a century. Lakes dried up completely. Forests died and turned to desert. The early human population of entire regions went extinct. Fossil sites show sudden disappearances of hominin remains, marking population collapses. Imagine watching resources dwindle year after year, decade after decade, until there was simply nothing left, and everyone died. Fact 84. Tsunamis erased coastal populations. Coastal groups who had settled near reliable water and fishing grounds were vulnerable to tsunamis. Multiple coastal archaeological sites show sudden abandonment or destruction layers. When underwater earthquakes generated tsunamis, walls of water would strike with no warning. Everyone too close to shore, including all the children, elderly, and mothers with infants, would be swept away and drowned in minutes. Fact 85. Toba supervolcano reduced humans to 3,000 individuals. The Toba supervolcanic eruption 74,000 years ago was the closest humans have come to extinction. Genetic evidence suggests all humans alive today descend from a population that may have been as small as 3,000 breeding individuals. 99% of early humans died in the aftermath. The volcanic winter lasted 6 to 10 years. Most survivors were probably in equatorial Africa. The rest of the human-inhabited world became a frozen wasteland where nothing could survive. Fact 86. Dust storms buried groups alive. In arid regions, massive dust storms could bury encampments. Archaeological sites show remains of individuals caught in sudden dust storms, their lungs filled with dust, suffocated while trying to breathe through particulate-laden air. The sand and dust would cover everything, burying them where they fell, creating instant graves for entire groups. Fact 87. Frostbite caused fingers and toes to fall off. In cold climates without adequate clothing, frostbite was common and catastrophic. Fingers and toes would freeze, turn black, and eventually fall off. Multiple skeletons show loss of extremities consistent with severe frostbite. Living without fingers made tool use nearly impossible. Loss of toes impaired walking. These individuals often died shortly after from inability to function. Fact 88. Floods spread disease through corpses. When floods occurred, they would wash away corpses and spread disease downstream. Groups drinking from contaminated water would contract cholera, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases. Multiple individuals would sicken simultaneously, unable to care for each other. Entire groups could die within days of a flood from disease rather than drowning. Fact 89. Earthquakes collapsed shelters on sleeping families. Seismic activity would cause rock shelters and caves to collapse without warning. Sleeping families would be crushed instantly or trapped under rubble. Sites show multiple individuals buried together under collapsed stone, preserved in the positions they were sleeping. Some survived the initial collapse but died slowly of dehydration and injuries, unable to escape the rubble. Fact 90. Toxic water killed desperate groups. During droughts, groups would drink from any water source, no matter how stagnant or toxic. Some waterholes contained dissolved minerals or bacterial toxins that caused fatal poisoning. Desperate groups would drink, then die in agony hours later from toxic exposure. Sites near toxic water sources show concentrations of hominin remains, evidence of mass death from drinking contaminated water. Fact 91. Homo sapiens warred with Neanderthals. When Homo sapiens expanded into Europe 50,000 years ago, they encountered Neanderthals who had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. Evidence suggests violent conflict. Neanderthal remains from this period show increased trauma. Homo sapiens rapidly expanded into Neanderthal territory. Within 10,000 years, Neanderthals were extinct. While some interbreeding occurred, the pattern suggests competition, violence, and possibly deliberate extermination by Homo sapiens. Fact 92. Mass murders in Cima de los Huesos. At Cima de los Huesos in Spain, a deep cave shaft contains remains of at least 28 individuals, all apparently killed around the same time 430,000 years ago. This appears to be evidence of a mass murder, possibly an entire group massacred by rivals and their bodies thrown into the pit. The individuals range from adolescents to adults. The way they died and were disposed of suggests deliberate violence on a large scale. Fact 93. Homo erectus. Hunted Homo floresiensis. In Indonesia, Homo erectus and the smaller Homo floresiensis, your hobbits, coexisted. Evidence suggests Homo erectus hunted floresiensis. The size difference was extreme. Homo erectus averaging 5'6", floresiensis only 3'6". Tool marks on floresiensis. Bones indicate butchering. Imagine being less than 4 feet tall, being hunted by creatures twice your size, who saw you as prey. The terror would be absolute. Fact. Vera 90. Hybrid offspring were sterile or died. When different human species interbred, Homo sapiens with Neanderthals, Denisovans with Homo sapiens, many offspring were likely sterile or had reduced fertility. Like mules, some probably died young from genetic incompatibilities. Parents would watch these children struggle and die, victims of their mixed heritage, caught between two species. Fact 95. Interspecies encounters always became violent. Evidence suggests that when different human species encountered each other, violence usually resulted. Territorial disputes, resource competition, or simply fear and aggression toward those who looked different led to fights that often ended in death. Sites where different species overlapped in time show evidence of trauma and violent death increasing during overlap periods. Fact 96. Neanderthals killed sapiens infants in territory disputes. Neanderthal sites from the period of Homo sapiens expansion show remains of Homo sapiens infants with trauma. This suggests Neanderthals killed invading sapiens children, either in raids or defensive actions. The interspecies violence went both ways, with both sides seeing the other's children as threats to be eliminated. Fact 97. Different species used skulls as tools. At some mixed species sites, skulls of one species show modification, suggesting they were used as tools or containers by the other species. This wasn't respectful burial, this was using rival species' remains as objects after killing them. The psychological impact of seeing your own kind's skulls used as bowls by another species would be devastating. Fact 98. Competition for caves led to genocide. Caves were precious resources, shelter from weather and predators. When different human species competed for the same caves, the conflicts were existential. Evidence shows that cave sites changed hands between species, often with violence. Entire populations would be wiped out to claim a single good cave site. The stakes were survival itself. Fact 99. Denisovans and Neanderthals fought in Asia. In Asia, Denisovans and Neanderthals overlapped. Genetic evidence shows they sometimes interbred, but also shows patterns suggesting violent competition. Both species were competing for the same resources in the same territories. Many individuals from both species probably died in these encounters, contributing to both groups' eventual extinction. Fact 100. Homo sapiens contributed to 6 species extinctions. Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, contributed to the extinction of at least 6 other human species: Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo erectus, and Homo heidelbergensis. Whether through direct violence, resource competition, disease transmission, or some combination, our species played a role in eliminating every other human species on Earth. We are the only survivors because we were the most efficient at killing and displacing our competitors. Our evolutionary success is built on the extinction of our cousins. We are the last human species because we eliminated all the others. Conclusion. And so we reach the end of our dark journey through deep prehistory. These 100 facts represent only a fraction of the horror and brutality of early human existence. For millions of years, our ancestors lived in a world of constant violence, where death came suddenly and painfully, where compassion was rare and survival required ruthlessness. They were not noble savages living in harmony with nature. They were desperate creatures caught between animal and human, capable of love and cooperation, but also of astonishing cruelty and violence. They killed each other, ate each other, dominated each other through fear and force. But they survived. Through all of this horror, some survived each generation. They adapted, evolved, eventually became us. Every person alive today is descended from those who endured these nightmarish conditions. Your ancestors survived predation, disease, starvation, violence, and extinction events that killed the vast majority of early humans. You exist because they were tough enough, lucky enough, and adaptable enough to survive when most didn't. That's the legacy we carry. Not just the capacity for violence and cruelty we inherited from them, but also the resilience, the cooperation, the fierce will to survive that got them through millions of years of horror. The world they lived in is gone. We've built civilization on the foundation of their suffering and survival. We have medicine, law, ethics, compassion, all things they lacked. But we should remember where we came from, remember the darkness from which we emerged, and be grateful that we live in a time so much less brutal than the deep prehistory that forged us. This has been The Dark Truth, 100 terrifying facts about ancient prehistoric humans. Thank you for listening. End.